I'd always felt very strongly that I wanted to have children. I knew that being pregnant was an experience that I wanted to have. I can actually remember the exact moment when I went from being someone who knew that I would eventually be a parent to being ready.
Black women, the foundation, life at the intersections, source of divine creations. Now listen, now converse.
We're doing it the old-fashioned gay way. Is living with HIV, and I was like, "How would you like to have a baby with me?" Every 2-week wait, my imagination would give birth to this baby.
Telling our own stories, birthing new possibilities. Telling our own stories, birthing new possibilities.
You are listening to the Black Women's Department of Labor, a podcast and project by yours truly, Taja Lindley, where we examine the intersections of race, gender, and the double entendre of labor to work and to give birth. Welcome to the second and final part of our birth story series, where we're bearing witness to folks who have relied on reproductive technologies to support their desire to get pregnant. Today's episode features Olivia G. Ford's story, which begins with what she calls the old-fashioned gay way. She began her path to parenthood as a single queer woman working with a gay guy friend as her known donor. And spoiler alert, that way didn't exactly create the outcome Olivia was going for, but it was a huge part of her nonlinear journey to motherhood. An on-time reminder that with intention and enthusiasm, we can get where we want to go, but the process of getting there may not look the way we initially envisioned. This episode has been edited for clarity and for length, but if you want to hear all of the juicy, funny, and poignant details of Olivia's birth story, head on over to patreon.com/Taja Lindley. Your contribution supports the podcast and gets you access to this and other full interviews from the season.
My name is Olivia G. Ford. My pronouns are she, her, or they, there. I'm a writer, editor, sometime communications consultant. I have worked primarily in HIV specific media and around sexual health and health justice issues since about 2007. Also, I'm a doula. I trained as a doula actually for the first time in 2004. I'm from Brooklyn originally, but I identify as kind of, in a sense, Southern returned in that I have family roots in New Orleans, but I've also lived in the Bay Area. That's where I first trained as a doula and sort of became myself in a lot of ways. I spent my 20s there.
Okay, so before you share your story of navigating assisted reproductive technologies, why did getting pregnant and having a child feel like an important experience for you to have?
I'd always felt very strongly that I wanted to have children. I knew that being pregnant was an experience that I wanted to have. I just really felt as if it was just a life experience, kind of life phenomenon that I wanted to be part of, and that I felt as if I had something to contribute to another being. I'm not a finished product. I'm not done growing. I got to a point where I felt like, okay, I can sort of grow another person and I have something to offer them and contribute to them in terms of wisdom, grounding, perspective on life. I couldn't necessarily guarantee I'm going to be a fantastic parent, but I felt ready to experiment with myself as a parent, if that makes any sense.
So, before you got pregnant, what were you up to? What were your concerns and your dreams? And how were you living in the world?
I lived in the Bay Area in California for most of my 20s. I had just moved back to Brooklyn at the time. I moved back when I was 27. Soon after moving back, actually started working in the field that I've been in for the past, like, going on 15 years. I started working in HIV specific media. I was an editor at an online HIV information and support resource. And the part of the reason I bring that up is just because that's sort of part of my journey, sort of being in this field, in this community, but also that was like the most stable job that I had had. Like, I had a full-time job. I was like back in the city where I was born, where my kind of like most present roots were, where I had a lot of family, where I had a lot of friends and loved ones. I was just sort of feeling very embraced back into a place that I had been. I sort of immediately felt very at home in this community and in this role, as if that piece around kind of right livelihood and sort of doing something with my skills and with my energy and time that kind of support me in a material way and also be useful to folks who I consider to be my folks and like a movement that I felt passionately about. Like I was like, okay, done. You know what I mean? Like this piece feels like it's in a good place, you know? I can actually remember the exact moment when I went from being someone who knew that I would eventually be a parent, like I would eventually have kids, to being ready. It was like a very random moment. I was actually, I think it was my first time returning to the Bay Area for a visit after I had lived there. I was like on the bus to like the Oakland airport and I'd seen like a mom who was probably around my age, like late 20s, got on with a toddler and she sat behind me. I was kind of listening to them like have their little interactions. I heard the baby giggling and I had this thought. The thought just very clearly ran through my mind. That could be you. You know, like you could have a baby too. You could be the person sort of charged with caring for another human being. I just felt in that moment like I was ready for it, just for the entire package, including just sort of like the mundane everyday things of, you know, kind of like shepherding a child through life. I had been sort of bringing the idea of parenting from thought into pre-action as I was starting to prepare to try, and when I was trying, I had started to go to the center over on West 13th Street for their, like, planning biological parenthood group. The LGBTQ center in the West Village in Manhattan is a very large, comprehensive, queer, trans, you know, just like it's a community center. It's probably one of the largest in the country, and they have every kind of, like, programming thing that you can think of in terms of becoming a parent, which is interesting. You know, like they've got planning biological parenthood, they've got planning for adoption support groups, they've got, you know, like, are you like a queer woman who wants to like meet a gay man who also wants to have babies? It's like speed dating for getting pregnant or what have you. They've got that. Every
I love
iteration.
that.
I kind of love it too. I did not do that one, but I love that it exists. At the time, they broke it down by like planning biological parenthood for women. So it was like people who were, you know, with uteruses who were trying to get pregnant. And then it was like planning biological parenthood for men. Like, what does it look like to go get somebody else pregnant? So that was how the support groups were sort of carved up. And I started going to that planning biological parenthood for women group not long after I moved back to New York. So I started going in like probably early 2008. I would just go to the groups and listen and ask questions. And, you know, there'd be people at all steps of the process from trying to thinking about trying to been trying for years to sometimes a pregnant person would come back and be like, thanks for all your help. So yeah, I'd already been doing that when I had this moment where I was like, oh, actually now I'm ready. Like if I got pregnant tomorrow and had a baby like 9 months from now, I feel like I could make my life fit that. Then I went and got on the plane and, you know, went on with my life and continued to go to the groups and, you know, got my plan together, yada, yada. 9 years later, I had a baby.
Wow. So you've been planning for a minute. I'm just curious when the tipping point came. When were you like, okay, now I want to start putting this knowledge into practice?
You know, I was sort of looking around in my life for, I was thinking about, do I want to go with a sperm bank? Do I want to do a known donor? And I had had like a whole kind of series of conversations with a dear, dear friend of mine who's going to be my donor. I guess we probably started having those conversations like about probably early that year, early 2012.
So, do you mind sharing a little bit about who this friend was and what was this conversation that y'all had?
I thought about that a lot, like how to frame it to him, because I had kinda had my eye on him in this way. I mean, we had been friends for many years already. We were very close. This is a friend from the Bay Area, but he had moved to Brooklyn not long after I moved to Brooklyn, actually. And, you know, I was sort of working up to asking him this question. I was like, "What do I say?" Like, it's like a proposal, right? How do I word it? Like, how do I propose to this person in this way? And I think pretty sure I was in his kitchen, and I was like, "How would you like to have a baby with me?" And he's like, He's like, "What?" But, you know, elaborate, please. Because I think that some people, their journey with a donor is that it's like someone else who also really wants to have a baby. And I knew that that wasn't necessarily something that he was like really gung ho about wanting to do. But I had a sense that he would be just a really wonderful genetic addition to a person's life. But also, just, I thought he would just be a really beautiful presence. Though I made clear from the beginning that I wasn't expecting him to co-parent per se. There were many more conversations, like what would the kid call me? What would we tell tell them about my role? Would I be like a dad? And this was one of the things that made me really excited to engage with him in this way, is that I felt like he was someone that I could communicate with if things should change. Like, once you have a kid, you're sort of tied to the person in whatever way, for better or for worse, for your whole life. Even if it's all, it's super 100% planned and all good, and you're whatever, you're in love or you're in agreement about what your engagement is going to be, shit changes. It can change no matter what. And I just felt as if this was someone that I could communicate with as things changed if they did. One thing that interestingly he was kind of leaning on me for information about is that is living with HIV. It was becoming clear at that time, in terms of the kind of studies coming out. It was this like, very exciting development that when a person is on effective HIV treatment, they're undetectable. They can't actually transmit HIV through sex or through like sperm into body or semen into body. And at around that same time, a drug called Truvada was in the approval process as pre-exposure prophylaxis, or PrEP, which is a drug that a person who is not living with HIV can take in order to remain HIV negative if they have if they have a partner who's living with HIV, or if they have partners whose HIV status is unknown to them, as a layer of HIV prevention to kind of stay HIV negative. When I first sort of said to him, like, "Oh, you want to make a baby?" He was like, "Oh, wow," but he's like, "Is that possible? Like, in terms of my status, what would that look like? Like, how would you stay HIV negative?" He'd kind of like heard a little bit about the, like, treatment as prevention studies that had come out. I just, kind of told him about some of that, and that, it was not likely to impossible that I would become HIV positive through like putting his semen in my body, basically. I know that some people with donors, like, they have sex, and we did not even really have the conversation about doing that. It was just not something that was part of our relationship.
So early-ish 2012, y'all have this conversation. Between the first conversation and y'all taking action, how much time has passed?
I would say a good, like half a year or so. My donor and I actually had a conflict, not about, what we were doing, but we had like a miscommunication. Like, that summer was really popping. It felt like this moving train. I was like, "Let's go." But there were ways that we kind of like had to pump the brakes and return to our core connection as people who were about to do something really intense together. And we were able to kind of reset and do that and resolve our conflicts in a really beautiful way. And I think probably strengthen our friendship as well, and strengthen our ability to go forward and do something really kind of wacky and challenging together. And we did. I actually had just broken up with someone. I'd like gotten out of a relationship that was like really repressive, frankly, and was like discovering who I was out of that. And I was like transitioning from like friend zone to like boo zone with the person who would become my wife, my then friend, girlfriend, partner, lover, eventual wife. And I were friends before we started dating. So if I remember correctly, I think I may have told her that I was going to start trying to get pregnant. I definitely told her before we were dating. Like, getting pregnant was not something that she had ever wanted for herself or planned to do herself. And just in terms of her age, my wife has a few years on me. She's 17 years older than I am. So at that time, she was already like, even if I wanted to get pregnant, I wouldn't, that's not something that I could do, but she didn't even want to. So it wasn't something that she was considering. And then, that was something that she was aware of as we started dating. No partner that I had during the period of time that I was trying was a person that I was trying to have a baby with, until the person who would become my wife. I was going into this as a single parent, as like a person who was going to do this as a single parent. I was going to do it with a village, but on my own. Yeah, so it was sort of already part of, kind of part of our conversation as friends. She knew my donor, she really liked him. She just thought that it was really beautiful that we were planning this and doing this together. She was really supportive of this as a thing that I was doing. I've thought about it a lot since, and at the time it felt very natural and right, and still does, that the process of it becoming something that we're doing together was very organic and happened over time. Like, it wasn't like we started dating and she was like, "I'll be the baby mama too. Like, let's think," you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like an accelerated process in that way. Like, she was definitely like, "We're dating and this is something that you're doing and I'm excited for you."
So we're in late 2012, I believe, and you and your friend are moving through this process of baby making. So for folks who are unfamiliar with assisted reproductive technologies and how would it work to have a donor without having sex, what was the process that you all went through? What were some of the highlights of the steps that you took to co-create a child together?
Highlights were like hijinks. I always say there's a lot of it's like physical comedy, like trying to get pregnant. Basically, we used what I like to call the old-fashioned gay way. People talk about, "Oh, a turkey baster." You don't actually use a turkey baster, folks at home. It's way too wide. Just real talk. If you try to draw semen up into a turkey baster, it just splashes on the sides. So don't use a turkey baster.
Are you
Use
speaking
a
from experience or did you find this on a YouTube video?
I think there probably is a YouTube video of it, but it became clear, like, I'd read a lot of, like, queer parenting books that include, like, the process of getting pregnant. I remember in one of the, like, one of, like, lesbian pregnancy books, one of the things was, "Lesbians, you may not be used to seeing, like, amounts of semen. It's not much." Like, that was sort of what like, you don't need that much, and it's not like it's like a gravy in a turkey amount of semen, like, it's just a little bit. So, like, the rec like, so it's important to note, like, the hole is too big, this it's way too wide, is not a good conduit. It's like it's just not a good tool. And there's a number of different methods that exist and that we tried, but we started with using a needleless syringe. Like, basically, it's like a syringe that you would use to, like, give yourself a shot, but it doesn't have a needle on it. Oftentimes, it's used to, like, feed infants. It's like a very small syringe, and you draw the semen up into it, and then you put it in your vagina, and you go onto your cervix, basically.
Were the tools and the materials that you and your donor friend used, were these over the counter things or were these things you had to get a prescription for? Were they expensive? Were they covered under your insurance?
A needleless syringe is very cheap. They're just a couple of dollars, like a single digit number of dollars. You can get them at any drugstore. They have different sizes. Like, I had started out with a very, very small one, and I ended up finding one that was slightly larger that worked better. Just in terms of my hands holding it, again, it seemed it's like a small amount, so it wasn't like I needed a bigger one because it was a large amount. It was just for my own. Again, you figure out, like, sort of kinesthetically, like, what works and what tools work best. But yeah, needleless syringe. I think some doctors who are supporting folks who are trying to conceive will give that stuff out. My provider did not even offer that, and I didn't even hear until later about people whose providers were, like, giving them this stuff. I just got this stuff myself. And again, I experimented with different cups, like, for him to ejaculate into. We just experimented with different things, like what would work best in terms of him, in terms of, like, aiming and catching, and also for, like, because you wanna get all of it, like, you don't wanna have to transfer it to another receptacle because then you're losing precious semen. You really wanna minimize any kind of transfer from, like, one container to another.
So he would go and masturbate and produce a sample, and then you'd be waiting in the next room.
Yeah. We did this 10 times over 10 cycles, and we did anywhere from 1 to 3 times within a cycle.
And how long is the cycle?
Your fertile window is like 5, 6 days. I got to learn a lot about my fertility and my own reproductive cycle, my own menstrual cycle. I had started charting. That's something else that was, like, such a huge part of my life at the time that I haven't even mentioned. Like, I think a good year before I started trying to get pregnant, I had gotten a basal body temperature thermometer, and I had started charting my morning temperature. Like, you take your temperature in the morning, right before you do anything else. Basically, the way that one's temperature fluctuates during their menstrual cycle, like their monthly cycle, is an indicator of the period that they are fertile. So you start to chart your temperature and be aware of your own cycle and know, like, when you're going to ovulate. And I started learning about cervical mucus changes. The mucus that comes out of your vagina, like, changes. It's like more stretchy. That also indicates that you're in a like, that stretchy mucus is like the mucus that is like, come here, sperm. Like, it's made, your body makes it to let every month because it
Come
could grab.
hither.
Exact. Totally. It's deep. Like, it's made to, like, draw in sperm. Like, there's pictures of it under a microscope, and it's like it's made to, like, draw in and, like, trap sperm and just send them to the fallopian tube, like, send them down to, like, get you pregnant. I learned to sort of chart those signs, and I did it old school. Now there's a million apps that you can do this stuff on, but I have somewhere in my old journals, I have, like, reams of calendars, just printed charts. Like, I used to print them surreptitiously at my job and just chart every morning in with a pencil, and, like, draw the line of, like, "Oh, is my temperature going up?" And this is something that doctors will try to refute people on. Like, they'll say, "We'll tell you when you're ovulating," which is, like, one of those big pet peeves with assisted reproductive technology and the medical profession in general, that they're like, "Trust me, I'll tell you about your body with my tests." When there are so many things that we can know about our bodies that surpass that knowledge and help you get pregnant better, frankly, because sometimes they'll say, "Oh, when you've ovulated, then I'll do the insemination." I don't even know why this became an aspect of what fertility doctors do. Like, you've got to get it in before you've ovulated. Like, if you've ovulated, you may have missed your window. Like, the egg's already kind of like on its way. It needs like the sperm needs to like be in there, ready to like meet the egg when it comes out. And your body tells you when you're going to ovulate. Like, you get all these signs, and you have that power to know that and be able to say like this is the time. It's like very exciting to know, and it's very disheartening when providers try to like disabuse people of that knowledge, and they're like, "Oh no, don't worry about all that charting. It takes too much time. Just come in and I'll monitor you." They still usually, if you're going through the clinic, which we also did eventually, they do that monitoring as a matter of course. There's also information that you can come in equipped with based on your knowledge of your own body, if you kind of start paying attention in certain kinds of ways.
So you said you and your donor did this 10 times. How long did that take?
About 2.5 years. Sometimes we did consecutive cycles, but sometimes just, like, our, like, life got in the way, or not got in the way, but we would be like, "Oh, well, we can't do this month," or "This is coming up," or "I'm traveling," or "You're traveling." I mean, I think there were some months where we just weren't feeling it, you know what I mean? Like, it just didn't work out, and we were just like, "Okay, energetically, this doesn't feel right, like, let's just, like, hold off." Communication was, like, our big strategy. I never said, "Be a monk, don't have sex with other people." I mean, he's a gay man. I never said, "Don't have sex with other men while I'm inseminating." Like, let me know if anything occurs in your sex life that could lead to you being vulnerable to, like, other sexually transmitted infections that could easily be transmitted. Because things like PrEP and being on HIV treatment do not prevent other STIs. Like, it's just like, it's real, and we're not going through a clinic, so nobody's screening this. This is all the old-fashioned gay way. This is all us communicating, you telling me what's up, and me trusting you, and never having that be challenged. Like, I always was affirmed over and over again that I had reason to trust this person, because if something came up where he's like, "Oh, I need to like go get tested for this STI, like let's hold, like we probably don't want to try this month until I get my test results." Just to make sure, I just want to like be transparent. But other than that, I would realize that I was like moving into my fertile window. I would call him. He would ask for like a day's heads up, and for the reason of like, let me like clear my schedule. And also, this is good for people who are trying. Like, it's a good idea not to ejaculate for a good like 24 to 48 hours before you're going to try to inseminate someone or get them pregnant, so that you get this buildup of active sperm. So, I would want to tell him at least a day or two in advance so that he could like refrain from ejaculating until our moment. And there are lots of things that we got increasingly more comfortable with over the years. Like, the first time he was like, "Could you take a walk?" It was at my apartment in Brooklyn. He's like, "I think I'd feel more comfortable if you took a walk." And I was like, "That's fine." He like went in the back, did what one needs to do in order to like get excited, come, ejaculate, get your little sample together. And then he like texted me, "You can come back." And I didn't go far. There's kind of like different science around how long like a fresh sample will be good. It's really ideal to keep it warm, like keep it like body temperature warm, like you like put it between your breasts or like put it between your knees, or you like hold it somewhere where it's going to stay warm. And they say if you do that, it can be a few hours, but we really never wanted to mess with like a few hours, we really wanted to sort of, do it as soon as possible, like inseminate as soon as possible after he had produced the sample. Yeah, the first time I made like cupcakes or something, like it was sort of like a celebratory thing. I was like, "You can have a cupcake when you come out. I'm going for a walk." By the time we like had been in a couple of years, I would come over like right before he went out, and he'd do it. And he'd be like, "I gotta go." Like, we started doing it at his apartment. Like, we just went through a lot of iterations of what we were doing. So, okay, I'm just gonna quickly go through like just like a standard process. You get your semen, you've got it in, whatever receptacle you're gonna use. Take your needleless syringe, or I mean, again, nuts and bolts. But for a while, we used almost like a makeshift cervical cup. I used a menstrual cup, and he would ejaculate into that, and I would insert that. It was one like that you're supposed to dispose of after every time. Like, it's got a kind of a flexible round top, and like, almost looks like a diaphragm. Like, it's got like a polyurethane like reservoir basically. You can like pinch it and insert it, and it like covers your cervix. And that minimize like the whole thing of like having to vacuum it all up basically with this needleless syringe, like get all the little drops and spillage. Like, talk about hijinks. Like, I had once or twice, I had the horrifying experience of like it leaked back out. Now it's gone. You know what I mean? Like, I inserted the sample, it like leaks back out. it's just on the rug, you know what I mean? Like, fuck, like we can't use it, it's gone now, this precious substance. But so you insert it however you're gonna insert it. And kind of popular wisdom is you kind of like chill out, be still, put your hips up for anywhere from like half hour to an hour. The acupuncturist that I started seeing during that time was like, just go to bed. She's like, just be restful, like just be in that space. Don't try to get up and do other stuff. You know what I mean? Like just like stay in that zone, stay in like a yin place. Don't even try to do anything for the rest of the night. Chill out, lay down, just keep the vibe chill. And yeah, I mean, just physically, if your hips are up, gravity helps the sperm swim to the cervix and through the cervix. So I would do that. Like he would kind of leave the sample. And again, like that first time I was like, it's a party. But by the end, it's kind of like, bye, see ya, love you. Like you lay up and I'm gonna go. We don't have to like have cupcakes or whatever. And then the 2 week wait starts, which anybody who is trying to get pregnant knows very well. They're like, okay, the clock has started, like, is my temperature staying up? Because that's the thing, like, if you're pregnant, your basal body temperature in the morning will stay at an elevated level and start to actually, I think, elevate even more. And as part of your menstrual cycle, when you are no longer in a fertile window and you are not pregnant, your temperature goes back down. So it's one of those things that you watch. Like, is my temperature staying up? Is it still up or did it go down, like below a certain level? And that's, kind of like the roughly 2 week wait between, inseminating and knowing if you're pregnant. And again, we did that 10 times, 9 times at home, and we actually did go to a clinic once and do intrauterine insemination with his donor semen, which is another story. That's like Olivia and her donor meet the like reproductive industry because we had been doing all of this at home and like taking cues and like some advice from medical literature, but not actually going to a clinic and like engaging with a clinic in that way. And it's just a whole other ball game. And it's a very heteronormative ball game. I mean, and then, and it starts to get into what our insurance would cover. Like up until that point, I'd really just done regular GYN visits, regular primary care provider visits. Everything had been covered by my insurance. In terms of HIV research, the person having an undetectable viral load is really like protection enough. You don't have to take PrEP. But at the time, all of these things were fairly new. And I was like, I'll take PrEP as another like layer of prevention. And I was taking it, it was covered by my insurance. I had rarely really had to like pay for anything big, frankly, in the couple of years. And then after a number of times, a couple of years trying and it wasn't working, I was like, let's get a little more technical. Let's basically what we were doing at home was intracervical insemination. At home insemination, you like put the semen up by the cervix and like say, good luck, sperm, get on your way to swim up into the uterus and like implant and make a baby. And it had not worked. So intrauterine insemination is more direct. There are some providers that will do it outside of a clinic setting. There are some midwives who do it, which is lovely. It can be done at home, but you need like there's like more high tech tools that you need and support that you need to do it at home. And we didn't have that. So we went into this clinic. It was one that I was already aware of through my work as one that would work with couples, people trying to have a baby where one of the partners was living with HIV. Many years there were very few fertility clinics that would work with people living with HIV, period. And then as there were a few that would, they had very, very stringent guidelines for what procedures they would sanction and perform. And for the most part, it was they would only do IVF. Like basically the goal was as little contact between a human who is not living with HIV and the semen of a human who is living with HIV as possible. They would only do in vitro fertilization with sperm washing to like remove any potential like HIV cells from the sperm. And then, basically like harvesting eggs, like create embryo off here in petri dish and then reinsert it. This is a very expensive and invasive procedure. I thought of as something that in terms of my fertility, that I was not yet needing to graduate to because it's an intervention that's often used if other things have not worked and we hadn't tried those other things. We hadn't had the opportunity. And I'd heard tell that this clinic was starting to, in keeping with what we were learning about the science around HIV transmission and the very low to no likelihood that a person who's on successful treatment, who has an undetectable viral load, is going to transmit HIV, they were starting to kind of incorporate that into their practice and be less stringent about those particulars. Like basically they would do regular fertility interventions on a couple where one person was living with HIV as opposed to this like mega intervention that is not always indicated for the person's level of need for that intervention, if that makes sense. So I knew about this clinic just through my work. I knew they were starting to do like intrauterine insemination with like women who are not living with HIV and their partners who are living with HIV. So I was like, let's go. But we still had to say we are partners in order to be seen. Like we couldn't just be like, we're just two like swinging queer folks. We're not like life partners. We're just trying to have a baby together. Like you really have to kind of like be straight.
Who makes that a requirement? Is that a law? Is that a hospital or clinical policy or a health insurance policy or some combination?
And it's an FDA designation of whether you are partnered or whether the person you are with is a tissue donor. Even if you don't call them that. Basically, if you're partnered with someone and and it's assumed that you're having sex, there's an assumed level of risk that this person is entering into where we are not liable for whatever happens in terms of them acquiring a health condition. But if the person is not your sexual partner, then they are a tissue donor. And that falls under more stringent guidelines in terms of the FDA and what is allowed in terms of that clinic being able to continue to operate as a clinic because they would be seen as being in violation of like FDA standards for a tissue donor if they just let you walk in off the street, quote unquote, and be the two people who have decided to have a baby together and take that person's semen and inject it into the other person's body through intrauterine insemination, no matter what their knowledge is or your knowledge is about and no matter what you've said you're accepting in terms of potential vulnerability, those kinds of interpersonal human processes don't enter into the frame in terms of like what is allowed by, like FDA regulations. So basically, if I had gone in there and been like, we're just trying to have baby, like we're doing it the old fashioned gay way. I've been inseminating at home. It hasn't been working. Want to help us? Like help us in our journey? We're already on this journey together. They'd be like, well, you're a tissue donor. So give us a sample. You're going to quarantine it for 6 months. We're going to do all this testing. We're going to do all this and that. Like basically, you are separated as people who have decided to have a baby together and you become like donor and recipient, just no matter what. We never even tried that because I already knew that that was what would happen. And again, this is the kind of thing that it actually is in queer parenting and getting pregnant books. Like they talk about those kinds of designations and the kinds of roadblocks that you can run into with a known donor. And really like a system, it's just biased against queer folks. It's biased against gay men. Gay men cannot donate sperm anyway. Like he could not have been an unknown donor. You can't get a gay man's sperm any other way. You can't go through like traditional channels. I wanted to stay away from having to engage with a system that's biased against my people. I didn't want to have to bend. And I really reconciled it to myself. We reconciled to ourselves. And that, I mean, when I was like, this is my partner, that was true to me. We were partners in trying to make this baby. So, and they never said what kind of partner, life part, like they never actually asked if like, I mean, they were like, how long have you been trying? And we said, we've been trying for X amount of time. They didn't say, were you having sex? I mean, there are so many things that are just assumed when you are assumed to be heterosexual that we just went with it. So we never actually had to like say untrue things because we are partners in trying to do this. And it's funny because like, when we went in to meet the doctor, he was like, where did you meet? I mean, we told him where we met. You know what I mean? Like we told them like love each other, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, hijinks, talk about hijinks. So we did do that once, and, through the clinic, we did that once together after a couple of years that it just hadn't been working. We both had to go in for, like, the morning monitoring stuff, and he had to, like, give a sample in the clinic at a separate time. Like, they do, like, a process of washing it so that it's, like, ready to, like, go into the uterus, basically. And then I had to take I think I took Clomid. Part of their process is, like, you augment the process by taking fertility drugs. So I did that. It did not work. The second time we were kind of, like, getting back into doing it, and we were gonna go do another go, the Clomid had caused me to have an ovarian cyst. So they wouldn't do the procedure again because of that. So we never did it again in the clinic. We actually did try 1 or 2 more times at home, even though because the cyst doesn't necessarily stop you from getting pregnant, but it stops them from doing the procedure. They're like, "No, we can't do that until that it'll probably clear up on its own, but we're not gonna do it until that's cleared up." But we tried again, I think 1 or 2 more times at home, and we're not successful. At a certain point, we lovingly parted as partners in baby making. And he gave just so much to that process. I've sort of talked about it in terms of like, we tried 10 times, it didn't work, but every time was really hard. Like every time is devastating. Like you think that that's going to be the time. I remember all these times when I would get my period or my temperature would drop or, it would just, for whatever other way, it would be clear, like, I'm not pregnant again. Every 2-week wait, my imagination would give birth to this baby. It is a roller coaster, ups, downs, joy, pain, like just being so sure that this is the time, this is going to be the, like this is the month, like I'm going to get pregnant. I can feel it, like I feel different, like I feel like there's a baby in there. Like I feel like this is the time, and just being so hopeful and just being so sure. It is a reaming process. And I'm so grateful that I was engaged in it with someone who could hold that space, who was just really loving with me, was loving with himself. We were just really honest with each other. We could still, kind of like laugh about it, even as it was challenging it was challenging to not be successful. It was challenging to plan around our lives. It was just really hard at the time, but I'm grateful for that experience, like, I'm really grateful for having gone through that. I probably wouldn't have said that at the time because I was just like, "I just wanna fucking get pregnant and have a baby." It just flies in the face of, I guess, like, meritocracy. Like, you can do all the things right, like, you can kind of, like, be the best at trying to get pregnant, and it still doesn't work. Like, you can do everything that every book, every expert, every piece of evidence, every sensation in your body, every piece of intuition that you have tells you to do, and it's just so counterintuitive. It's like, "But I did all the things. Did I do something wrong?" And the answer is like, "No, probably not." I always wonder whether the next time we tried would have been the time that it would have taken, like it would have worked and we would have gotten pregnant with a baby that was with this person that I knew, that I loved, that we had this agreement with, this pact. We were in this journey together. Maybe the next time or the time after would have been the time that it would work, but it really was time to shift gears, shift approaches. Like, as queer folks, I feel like we're kind of like, even though there's a lot of people who are doing it, we're still kind of making the road by walking, So people are like, "Tell me what you did. Like, tell me how you talked to your known donor. Like, did you have a legal agreement?" I was in the process of writing an agreement that we would sign, kind of like formalizing that process. And many, many legal experts said this is not a thing that will necessarily hold up in court. Basically, if your breakdown in communication is such that this person wants a level of relationship with the child that you don't want, and you end up going to court about it, this is not a document that will hold up in court, but it is a statement of your original intentions. And it can remind you of that if things get bad. And that really resonated with me. And it's part of why I chose the person I did, because I felt like we could communicate no matter what. And I felt like if our desires changed, we could communicate about that and make a different arrangement. Like, if he was like, "Oh my God, I feel like actually I'm a dad. Let's talk about me having like actual custody." I would have been willing to talk about that. Like, I would have been willing to talk about almost anything with this person.
What year was this that you all decided to stop doing this together?
Maybe late 2015. It was around the time that I moved full time to New Orleans. It was definitely around that time that I was like, "I'm making this move. Logistically, it would really be really difficult to continue. And also, we've been doing it for a while. Let's like lovingly just like stop, close out, like just like have a loving like close out. Like, thank you so much for this journey." In terms of my continuing to try to get pregnant, I've been with my partner now for several years, and it felt right to, at this point, be like, "Well, what would you want in a donor? Like, what do you want this process to look like?" Because we were basically still going on my playbook, which she was fine with. Like, she was on board. And, it's like, okay, what are the alternatives? Like, what do you want this to look like? Do we pick out a donor who has like traits that are like yours, or do we even, like, we thought about maybe someone in her family, like a man in her family being a donor. We kind of kicked around those ideas and decided against it. Yeah, and we eventually just went the quote unquote traditional reproductive technology way of starting to work with a fertility clinic in New Orleans and finding sperm through a sperm bank and purchasing it and trying that way. And the second time it worked. It's so funny. When you sign up with sperm banks and like get an account or whatever, they do coupons. They have sales. It's like any other commerce. They're like, "This month, like, buy one, get one free, like, buy one vial, get one free, or, like, buy 4, get one free," or what have you. So, like, when I had first signed up with this particular sperm bank, we went through all these, like, files at these different sperm banks. We chose this one. We found, a fertility clinic that we were really happy with in New Orleans, and we had picked out this donor, and then, I was kinda like, "Oh, whatever, sooner or later, we'll decide to buy this sperm," and then I got this coupon in my email, and I was like, "Well, I gotta take advantage of this sale." So I bought 2 vials of semen, and the second one, I got pregnant with it. One of our things that we were looking for and that you could filter for when you search for a donor was, do they have past pregnancies? And this one did. We wanted a donor who would be open to being known at a certain point in our child's life. So the donor that we ended up choosing is what is an open ID donor who was willing to have their identity revealed when the child is 18. We also wanted someone Black, which when you filter for that, the numbers drop way down because a lot of the donors are white. Like a lot, it's just, yeah, this is like also a very white system. I feel like maybe part of my journey in the future that I have not gotten that deeply into in terms of sort of expanding the fertility industry to be more inclusive and to be more accessible to folks of color and Black folks and to have more options for us. And it's funny because I would say this to my acupuncturist who was just like, she was my everything in a lot of ways during this time. Like I just talked to her a lot about this process. She was probably the provider that I was most engaged with around like the nitty gritty of the process. She was just very understanding. She was really amazing. And I feel like I was like, man, I need to do all this advocacy around like sperm donation and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, girl, just get pregnant. Like she's like, don't go into this yang place of trying to burn the house down and like change the system. Just concentrate on getting pregnant. And that was really like to get that permission as someone who's like, I need to just get in here and like change the system, like she's like, that's great. Like, that's important. Like, for now, concentrate on getting pregnant. I was like, okay. The first time we tried was the end of 2016, going into 2017. I found out I was not pregnant on Christmas 2016. After a long time of not trying, at this point, I am now in my mid going on late 30s. And not only am I aware, but friggin' pop culture, everything you read is being very clear that your fertility plummets. Like I was seeing myself go through that age process, regardless of what was actually happening in my own body. I was seeing myself in the context of statistics and being like, oh, I feel like I need to like step up the methods. I found out I was pregnant on August 30th, 2017. I had been working with a fertility clinic in New Orleans and I went and got tested there. That was sort of part of their process. Like you inseminate with them, you come back in 2 weeks and do a pregnancy test. I have all of this, knowledge of my own body at my disposal. So I was aware that my temperature was not dropping. But that, I had had points before where it just doesn't drop for a couple of days and then it does. But I was like, okay, I was cautiously optimistic, but still cautious. It was the first time I'd ever gotten results about whether or not I was pregnant from another person. Other times I had just peed on a stick. I like held off from doing like a home pregnancy test. I got the test. They told me around what time they were going to be calling. I tried not to like gear my entire day towards it, but I did. I like worked not too far from home. I worked at like a co-working space and my wife worked at home and I was like, come by like around lunchtime. They're going to call and you'll be there like when they call. And she actually got there like a minute or two after they had called and told me I can still hear Jamie, the nurse practitioner who inseminated me successfully. I can still hear her voice in my head. She's like, you got your test results. You are pregnant with her little Southern accent. And congratulations. I was just like, ah. So August 30th.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah, I did end up peeing on a stick too because I just wanted to see it. Like I had taken so many pregnancy tests that were negative. Like I just wanted to, like on the commercial for crying out loud, and just like like that very kind of like it's like this emblematic part of trying to get pregnant where you like look at the stick and it like turns a color and you're like, it's so pregnant. I actually still have that on my altar, even though I realize it's something that I've had that I peed on. But you put, you like put a little cap on it and it's okay.
Yeah, put a little cap on
It's
it.
not like you have pee on your altar. Anyway, so and the line still stays on even though it's been, like, 4 years. Anyway, so that's how I found
Love
out.
it, and I hope you took a picture for posterity's sake
Oh,
as
yeah, of
well.
course. Oh my
If
gosh.
okay, in case the day ever came that you had to throw out the object. Um
Exactly. No, I totally took a picture, yeah. Because I was texting that picture to all of my people who had been, like, tracking the whole process. So I was like, "Girl," like, 12 times a charm. So, yeah.
What were some of the milestones of your pregnancy experience?
After many eventful years of trying to get pregnant, my pregnancy itself was really it was medically uneventful. I was just everything was so new. Like I was less like joy and more just like, whoa, like what like all these things that I knew intellectually happened to people's bodies were now happening to me. I mean, I've attended people's labors like for many years and births for many years and known pregnant people and sort of had like a higher than normal for like US society knowledge of like the process as someone who had never gone through it. And it was like completely new. Everything felt completely new because it was happening to me. And I decided after, kind of thinking about do I want to do midwives? For my prenatal care as well as the birth. There's a couple of different options in New Orleans. There's no freestanding birthing center, which would have been like my gold standard. There are birthing centers within hospitals, which are basically just like a different room in a hospital where you can birth with midwives. I ended up going with an OB. She was a Black woman. That was a huge part of it. All the midwives working in New Orleans at the time were white. All the ones working in the hospital setting at the time. We decided not to pursue home birth for the first labor and birth. I really liked my OB, and it was significant to have a Black woman provider, and that bore out through the entire process, through my labor and birth, which she was present for, which was really nice, which is much more of a standard thing in New Orleans than I remember it being in New York. Like, in New York, everybody's so busy, the practices are huge, it's pretty much understood that the doctor that you're with or the midwife that you're with your entire pregnancy, it's highly likely they will not be at your birth. Hopefully you get to meet the other people in the practice. So throughout my pregnancy, I kept saying, well, when am I going to meet the other people in your practice? Like, what if they end up being the person who was at my labor and my birth? Like, when do I get to meet them? And she was like, we don't really do that. I'm going to be there. There are a lot of things about my care that make me feel very glad that I went through this in New Orleans as opposed to in New York, just in terms of my own personality and my needs from a provider. The slower pace of the culture and of the city translates to the kind of care that you receive. And I really appreciated that in this time in my life. I have never felt, I don't think ever, or very rarely in New York with a medical provider, like they were fully present. I always felt like they were already on their next thing. I always felt like if they were behaving as if they were present, that it was a very rigorous training, that they are trying to behave as if they're present, but they're actually not. Do you have any other questions with your hand on the door, opening it as they are walking out the door? Do you have any questions? Okay, bye. As someone who, like knows how to self advocate, I am very immersed in a world of people who put a lot of primacy on like getting your voice heard in medical settings and at getting your questions answered no matter what. I'm the first person to be like, oh, you're busy. Okay, well, go ahead. And then I go home and I have 8 questions didn't get answered. The experience of having a provider go, do you have any questions? And then just sitting there was pretty amazing. And that's what I experienced in my care in New Orleans.
So did you secure a doula? Did you have a birth plan?
I did secure a doula. Interestingly, through the doula collective, through which I eventually became a perinatal health advocate, and I knew some folks already who were involved in the collective and found my doula through the collective. And she was awesome as well. I think everyone could benefit from having a doula, even if you have supportive partner, supportive mama, friends, even though, like my partner was super present and was an awesome, I say this to her all the time, was such an awesome birth partner. And she was really apprehensive, like, she had never attended anybody's labor. So, that piece was really new, but she was just, like, super amazing, super present. She was just great. And it was really great to have like our doula made that possible. It was, really helpful both to have her expertise and also to have her to, like, help bring Tara in, Tara's my wife. I mean, I may be a really good self-advocate, but you're giving birth is not the time when you wanna be like, "Hey, I don't want that to happen." You need other people to, like, facilitate that for you. Facilitate the lifting of your voice, and the guardianship of your needs and desires.
So when did you go into labor? Walk us through sort of like the initiation and what was your experience? Did things go according to plan?
There was a cover story of the New York Times Magazine, a brilliant piece written by Linda Villarosa about Black maternal health, like the Black maternal health crisis, essentially. The story that she told at the core of that really just like beautifully reported, amazing, just like groundbreaking piece was of a mother in New Orleans who had had just a really traumatic birth and ended up losing her child basically due to like hospital neglect, essentially. That was the hospital I was giving birth. This came out 2 weeks before I was giving birth. And the doula collective that was also profiled, like the doula that was profiled is a friend of mine. She was a part of the doula collective that I had my doula through. So sort of in that context, I was aware that, all the best laid plans, all the good OB, all the good nutrition, all the good this, like I'm a Black woman giving birth in the US. Like you control for any variable and our outcomes are devastating no matter what variable you control for education, anything. And I was already aware of that. And I was very acutely aware of that, sort of going into the final weeks of my pregnancy, taking in this story. Like, for all I know, we gave birth in the same room. I don't know that for certain, and I actually New Orleans being a very small world, I've actually met the person and, like, it was just some sort of information to hold. There wasn't necessarily anything that I could quote unquote do about that, you know? But that said, I went into labor on a Wednesday morning. Side note, my OB, I had seen her earlier that week and she was like, I'm gonna be traveling. Don't go into labor before Wednesday because I won't be here. And she's like, trust me, this works. She puts her hands on my belly and she's like, okay, baby, I'm gonna be out of town. Don't come until at least Wednesday because I'll be back on Wednesday. Okay. Okay. Lo and behold, I started having contractions at 1 a.m. on Wednesday. I was like, this baby was listening. So I had sort of like this intense contraction, this intense kind of pressure wave. And then I had another one 10 minutes later. And I was trying to go to bed. Like I just laid down in bed and I had another one 10 minutes later. And then I had another one 10 minutes after that. And I was like, okay, that's a rhythm. I got up and I went to the bathroom and there was like a little bit of like blood in my underwear. I had lost my mucus plug. So I was like, okay, that's two signs. Let's go to triage. So we get there at like 4 a.m. We lived about 10 minutes away from where I delivered. So it was easy to get there. The only time I had really actively negative experiences, like profoundly where I wanted to kick somebody in the face, was at that point in triage with this young ass resident who, I mean, not this is not an ageist thing because I also had some really amazing experiences with residents too. But I feel like she was probably tired. She had probably pulled a long shift. She was this white woman. She was just kind of like had this like know-it-all vibe. And she was trying to like check my cervix. And I was clenching up just because of like not feeling her. And she's like, you're a hard check. Like, if you don't relax, I'm gonna have to like, I can't remember what she threatened me with. She was just like, I'm gonna have to like use some tool. I can't remember what the hell she said. It was just something where she's basically like threatening me to get me to like relax. And I was just like, later for that. It was shady, it was shitty, but it was also at the end, it was like 7 a.m. It was, and I'm sure she was at the end of a long shift or blah, 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 blah. I'm sure she saw 500 people, but it kind of behooves you being in this line of work to just be able to put that on put on hold. If you can't get your fucking fist in my vagina, like there's a reason for it. You know what I mean? Like there's reasons. And you're yelling at me is not helping. So anyway, we were there for a couple of hours. They monitored me. I was not very dilated. I texted my doula. I think I started and I wasn't dilated at all when we got there. And by the time I left at about 7:30 in the morning, I was 1 centimeter, which is not a lot. So when I texted my doula, she's like, yay, maybe we'll see the baby in like a few days. And I was like, yeah, okay. We'll kind of like take it easy at home and, like wait a few days, just kind of like see how things unfold. But by the time we stopped and got some breakfast on our way home, I was already at the point where I was like, these waves are uncomfortable. Like I can't talk through them anymore. Like that's the sort of like the rule of, you know what I mean? Like if you can talk while you're having a contraction, you're probably pretty early in labor. So, we just sort of spent the day at home intermittently, just managing these contractions, eating some snacks, going on my hands and knees, doing my little position changes, getting my encouragement from my boo. And then at about 10, they just very quickly started coming really intensely and like 1 to 2 minutes apart, if that. And it's funny because I write way too long text messages. I had been trying to write an update text to my doula all day. Like I would start the text and then I would have a contraction. She hasn't heard from me since the morning until we call her at like 10:30. I'm like screaming. I'm like banging the like headboard against the wall, like, my wife is like, all right, I think we're gonna like head to Turo now. It's where I delivered, Turo Birthing Center. Nominally, it's called a birthing center. It's not really a birthing center. So poor thing. I really should have been updating her all day, sadly. but, but she was cool. I didn't have a contraction the whole time we were on our way to the hospital. I didn't have one while they were wheeling me in. And my doula was basically like tender, sort of very carefully being like, we're going to triage now. But based on what they say, what would you need to hear in order for you to feel like it's okay for you to stay? And what would you need to hear in order for us to advocate for you to just go back home? Because she was concerned that, like, okay, everything is stopped, but they're going to admit you get to the hospital and they're like, things are too slow. Let's do an intervention. It's harder to say no once you're there. If you possibly can, again, for those at home, labor at home as long as possible. Labor at home as long as possible. Be as far along as you possibly can be based on what is safe before you like go in. Because you just are in, once you go into the hospital, you're in their world. Just that cascade of interventions can happen. Like we got to triage And I started having more contractions, and it turned out I was 7 centimeters. So I was like, okay, well, let's just stick around. And, it's funny because it's like the next shift, like, it's basically the same time I was there the day before, so same nurses, a lot of the same nurses were there. They're like, "Oh, you're back. We didn't think we'd see you for a couple of days," you know? They admitted me. I got in a room with a tub that worked 'cause I really wanted to, like, have the tub as part of my comfort, though one of my OB's boundaries was, "I don't give birth in the tub." She was like, "I do not assist birth in the tub. If you wanna sit in the tub all you want, you can, but if you're gonna deliver, I'm gonna get you out of that tub before I deliver you." Or before the baby's born. I was like, okay. In my mind, I was like, if that baby's coming in the tub, it's just gonna come in the tub. Get on board. But I ended up giving birth outside of the tub. I ended up, like of my own volition, getting in the tub, enjoying it, having contractions, probably getting a nap in. There are pictures of me in the tub napping and Tars in the background napping, which I didn't remember happening at the time, but I have photographic proof that she, was able to get a little rest. Came out of the tub. At that point, my OB came. I guess she came about an hour, hour and a half before I gave birth, which again was nice. Sometimes they just swoop in at the very last second. She had this cadre of Black residents, like Black women residents who were like, I just felt like they were like my angels, like I just was like surrounded by Black women mostly when I was giving birth. And that was super amazing too. And also not common either. And again, I don't know if it was like, "Ooh, Olivia's giving birth. Let me call the Black residents and make sure that she's like surrounded by all this beautiful Blackness." I think it was really just more like who her cadre of residents is. It was pretty amazing and beautiful. And I felt really blessed about that. I just felt really, again, a lot of people have a lot of really negative experiences, particularly with this particular specific place of giving birth. I feel like a huge part of my doula's role was making sure that everything felt like my own idea. People would say things like, "Well, we're going to do this. Oh, well, it's time to do this." And she would say, "Olivia, did you hear that? Are you okay with that? Does that sound good? Like, does that sound like something you want to have happen?" I'd be like, "Yeah, yeah, that's fine." But everything was filtered through whether or not it was okay with me. And that was huge.
Yeah, that's one of my pet peeves around the healthcare system is the way I actually think it's really dehumanizing to treat people as objects. Like you're still working with a human being, even though it might be one of a dozen people giving birth on your shift and you've done it a million times. This person is still a person. You got to introduce yourself, you got to ask questions, you got to have some good bedside manner. And, if it doesn't work, then it might be time for a new profession.
I am with you. I am with you on this 1,000%. And also just the whole piece around labor and birth in and of themselves are not a medical event and they are happening in a medical context that the system and the context requires that medical things occur and they like make them occur. And for the most part, labor and birth, not a medical event. Just give it some space. So I was really grateful for the holding of that space. And yeah, I mean, I generally, again, this could have gone many ways, but I had a really good experience.
And I'm glad you had a predominantly good experience. So Orion comes Earthside.
Yes, she does on May 3rd, 2018.
What is the immediate postpartum like?
Well, immediately, I mean, literally, like, within minutes, she's born, and it was just, like, this huge relief, and, I pushed for, like, maybe, I guess, like, an hour and a half or so, and, here she comes, and, she's just got her, like, little, like, "I'm here," like, eyes open, just kinda, like, already, like, looking super curious. People say, like, "I immediately fell in love." That was not necessarily my experience, which is not to say I didn't love her, but I just what I felt most was, like, protection, like, "I protect you, like, I'm your protector." I hadn't slept for, like, 2 days. Soon after she was born, I was just, like, super duper exhausted, and I immediately and this is one of those things that if I had it to do over this is, like, an aspect of self-advocacy that I honestly had not thought of, which is that I was in a lot of pain from this tear. They just immediately gave me pain meds and I got Pitocin after she was born to deliver the placenta. I was like, "We got through this whole fucking birth without any Pitocin, and now I have Pitocin to interrupt, like, my natural flow of oxytocin?" Like, that was one thing that wasn't really a question. They're like, "Okay, we got Pitocin on here now for the placenta," and I was just like but by then she was born. Again, it's just one of those, like, the the system can sort of be very opportunistic and they're just kinda like, "Oh, she's busy. Let me just, like, do all these things."
What are some words of advice you can give to folks who are considering following a similar path that you went down?
I feel like if I have any kind of guidance is just to just be open to the lessons of the time. Just let the process, whatever it is, like be a teacher. So being able to hold that balance of letting go and recognizing that it's impossible to control or kind of like predict the outcome of every move, but also having that thoughtfulness about your moves. And that certainly that's a good warm up for parenting, because that is like parenting is just adapting based on what this new person like brings into your life. I'm just glad that you're having these conversations. I'm so excited to be part of it. I love telling birth stories. I love telling them sort of through a queer lens and with queer folks and in a queer context, especially a Black queer context. We have babies in all kinds of ways. We raise them in all kinds of beautiful ways. I'm excited to be part of the conversation in this way. And I'm really excited that I got to talk to you. It's such a blessing. And I'm so grateful for your work.
Shout out to Olivia for her tenacity and determination to become a mother. 12 attempts ain't nothing to sneeze at, okay? There are so many ways that Olivia's story really highlights the double entendre of labor. First, her relationship with HIV. Her work in the field really supported her in navigating and self-facilitating intracervical insemination at home with her known donor/friend. She understood the research, the precautions to take, the medical technology available, and the socio-political climate of finding a clinic to support her process when she decided to do intrauterine insemination. This double entendre also shows up when Olivia was met with the limitations of the fertility industry, namely, how Black folks are not properly represented and included in sperm banks, and how that prompted a desire within Olivia to do something about it. But thank goodness for the acupuncturist who reminded Olivia that she ain't gotta do it all, that she can just be trying to get pregnant, and that is enough. A message for all of us. Olivia's story is just so fascinating. She went from potential single parenthood to married and co-creating a baby with her partner, now wife. And there are so many more poignant, funny, and important moments of her journey that we just could not fit into this episode. But the good news is you can listen to her entire interview on patreon.com/Taja Lindley, where we talk more about the hijinks of baby making, navigating Black queer Brooklyn, and so much more. Both birth stories in this season of the podcast started with an intuitive knowing of the right time. Both LaConte's and Olivia's journeys were nonlinear and filled with grief and sadness and loss and disappointment, but they remained committed to the vision, even as it was filled with surprises, unanticipated hiccups, and blessings. Staying the course, that even when things got hard and challenging, they still continued, they still tried, and they still listened to their inner knowing and their inner calling that this was the right time. I also noticed some other similarities between their stories, like learning more deeply about their bodies in their 30s, becoming more intimate with the calendar of their fertility cycle, and the frustrations of immediate postpartum care in hospitals. And I want to close by saying I love birth stories because they remind me of the literal and metaphysical process of bringing someone or something into being, from conception to postpartum, the organizing principles of creation. There are so many ways to create, and I hope everyone who listens to these stories feels inspired to create in all of the ways you feel called to do so. Follow your own path, create your own story, birth your possibilities. I'm rooting for you. I give thanks for your time, attention, and listenership. If you are enjoying your experience, tell a friend and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts or on our website. And if you'd like to share your story or perspective with us, write us a message or leave us a voicemail at blackwomensLabor.com. Find us on Instagram at blackwomensLabor and sign up for our newsletter to receive project updates in your inbox. You can also support this podcast by dropping some coins in our PayPal or purchasing the podcast music on colorgirlshustle.bandcamp.com. The Black Women's Department of Labor is created and hosted by yours truly, Taja Lindley, also known as the HBIC. Audio engineering by Lila Larson. Music by Emma Alabaster, who also served as the pre-production associate producer. Additional music production by Chip Belton. Vocals by Patience Sings. Mixing and mastering by Chip Belton. Lyrics by Taja Lindley and Emma Alabaster. Logo and graphic design templates by Homegirl HQ. This podcast is produced by Color Girls Hustle.